We are honored once again to have Rabbi Ari Shishler join us all the way from South Africa. How did I know Rabbi Shishler is here? Because I saw all of the fan club that came to hear him, all of the former South Africans who have joined us. I'd like to welcome you. So someone said, didn't we just have Rabbi Ari a couple of years ago? As they say, the COVID years don't count. But I believe it was 5 or 6 years ago since Rabbi Shishler was last at the podium here at Yarchei Kallah, and it is a great honor and pleasure for us to have him back again to address us throughout the week. And I encourage everyone to keep coming each day and to bring your friends to join us as well. Today's topic is a changed world. It's part 1 of a 2-part series. Come back tomorrow for part 2. The new anti-Semitism, exploring pro-Hamas liberals, tunnel terror, and other anomalies. And again, with great honor and privilege, we would like to welcome Rabbi Ari Shishler.
Thank you, Rabbi Johnson, and it's Rabbi Barber even here. Thank you for all his behind-the-scenes work, for everybody who made this possible. It's really wonderful to be here again, and 5 years, in fact. Like you say, the COVID years don't count. And a lot has changed, We thought during that period that we knew how the world had changed. We thought we understood what had changed. In the meantime, in the last, 7, 8 weeks, 8, 9 weeks, however many weeks it's been, the world has changed yet again, and like the old saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So we're feeling a very uncomfortable déjà vu of our history at the moment. And that's what we're going to speak about a little bit today. You know, I traveled to New York shortly after Yom Tov, and you have to appreciate this from a South African context. It was the first time ever that somebody said to me traveling to New York, "Stay safe." It's a changed world. It really is. It's a changed world. And we're trying to get our head around it, trying to understand what's going on, what has happened. I said earlier in the earlier shir that for the first 24 hours after October 7th, we thought the world actually liked us. Everybody was rushing to our defense, and I don't say everybody, but there were condemnations, there was reaching out, and very quickly, this story seems to be changing. You know, a guy in our shul, we had a Farbrengen a few weeks ago, and a guy made a comment at the Farbrengen which I thought was really insightful. He said, the fence is no longer there. The fence that people used to sit on is no longer there. There's no more sitting on the fence. There's no more of this gray area. People have now polarized and picked a side. It's a fascinating thing to watch. So at the same time as today we're talking about this new anti-Semitism, I think we also have to acknowledge that there's also a new element of society that is speaking up for us. I have to tell you what's happened to me since I got here. Everybody, I walked into Meirev last night and somebody says, so are they really going to prosecute IDF soldiers in South Africa? Everywhere that I've gone since I got here, everybody say, what's happened to South Africa? What kind of a position has your government taken? I'll tell you, it's really simple. There's a radical politician in South Africa who got up the week after the attack, and he made the following statement. He said, next year when we come into power, we are going to send military support to Hamas. We were unsure which part we were supposed to laugh at more. By the time the next election comes, what Hamas? The fact that they're going to get into power was more laughable than the fact that there would be a Hamas to support. But the best part is that the very best thing that could happen to Israel would be if the South African government started to support them. We have a public transport system that has sat for 10 years waiting to actually get off the ground. Halavai, they were building the tunnels. So, what's happening in our world? I mean, it's an interesting time, it's an interesting place, and people are saying all kinds of interesting things. But let me tell you what else is happening in South Africa, just for context. Because the big joke that we have at home is that you would rather have a government that speaks out against Israel and people on the street who support you. So the interesting thing is that while the government is going on with rhetoric like you cannot imagine, I mean, the things that they have said are absolutely shocking, all it's done is forced the majority of the Christian population out into the public in support of Israel. So the main Chabad campus in Johannesburg is 1 block away from a church that now has a big sign outside of it that says, "We stand with Israel." And it's Christians, not Jewish people, who are marching in the streets of South Africa in support of Israel. So as we explore this new anti-Semitism, we also have to be cognizant of the fact that there are also new voices of support, because there's no longer a fence to sit on. And I think it's an important part of our conversation. Now, if you want to try and understand anti-Semitism, and that's an interesting project, to try and understand anti-Semitism. The famous historian Paul Johnson said that anti-Semitism is effectively the world's longest state of illogic. So we're going to understand it. We're going to explain it. This is the old, let me explain to you. The old anti-Semitism, they used to hate the Jews. The new version of anti-Semitism, they hate the Jews. And what exactly are we going to discover? I know what we're going to discover. We're going to discover people who say, we are not anti-Semitic, we are anti-Zionist. Okay. What's that expression? The woman doth protest too much. You know what happens when people say things really loud to try and convince you? How do you know that somebody is lying? When they overcompensate, yes? It's like when the person says, I promise you, this is exactly what happened. That's when you know, probably didn't happen. When a person tells you, some of my best friends are anti-Semites, I mean, some of my best friends are Jewish, so you understand what they're trying to tell you. When a person screams out, I have nothing against Jews, that's the best way for them to tell you, I have everything against Jews. I've just found a more sophisticated way to say it. So what is this new we're going to start digging around to find a new anti-Semitism that was never there before. What are we going to find already? What are we going to find? That people who hate Jewish people. Tell us something new. So I want to share a very interesting, and I'm pretty sure many people in the room are familiar with the Sikha. Very interesting Sikha of the Rebbe from 1965, Purim, Tafshin Chafei, 1965, where the Rebbe spoke about the nature of anti-Semitism, using the Megillah as a story, as a template. And I'd like to try and unpack that a little bit together, and let's see what we can get from it, because the Gemara in Megillah tells us that there's a mashal, there's a metaphor to describe Achashverosh and Haman. Achashverosh and Haman are in a certain regard similar to Balak and Bilam. What do they have in common? They had a running contest, who hates the Jews more? And then who's going to pay the other guy to do the dirty work of getting rid of the Jews? That's pretty much the similarity. So the Gemara says, what can we compare Achashverosh and Haman? The Gemara says something really interesting. Imagine you had two people. One person owns a field. In the middle of his field, there's a big pile of dirt. A tail, as we call it in Hebrew. A big mound of dirt. Every single day he goes in and out of his field, and this thing is playing on his mind. It's a thorn in his side. Here is this big mound of dirt. How am I going to get rid of the dirt? Where am I going to send the dirt? What am I going to do with the dirt? Meantime, there's another person who has a ditch. It's a big problem in his field. Somebody could fall into the ditch. His farming equipment could be damaged by the ditch. I don't know, in Australia, have you ever heard of something called a pothole? In South Africa, we have road around the potholes. So that's a ditch. It's a ditch. Baruch Hashem, we're a very resilient bunch. So in certain areas, they've now turned the potholes into public swimming pools. So the one guy's got a pile of sand that's in his way, in the middle of his field. It's a major obstacle. And the other person has a ditch, and he's got to somehow find sand to fill the ditch. So they make this arrangement between them. The one guy says, I'll pay you for your sand. I need to fill my ditch. I'll pay you for your sand. And the other fellow says, just take it. Take it. You don't have to pay me anything. Take the soil. I've been wishing for somebody to come and get this problem off my hands. Says the Gemara, that's Achashverosh and Haman. Haman comes along to Achashverosh and he says, listen, I've got a deal for you. I'm going to pay you a whole lot of money to get rid of the Jews in your empire. Achashverosh says, keep your money. Do the dirty work on my behalf. Gesundheit, here's the royal signet ring. Do whatever you want. That's the Gemara. Now do you understand anti-Semitism? Some people look at us like a pile of dirt, and some of them look at us like a ditch. Now we understand anti-Semitism. You got it? This is the secret. There are Achashverosh anti-Semites, and there are Haman anti-Semites. There's the anti-Semite who everywhere they look, there's a Jew. The Jews control the banks. The Jews control the media. I'd like to meet these Jews who control the media because they're doing a really bad job. Then you get the Haman Jews, the Haman anti-Semites. You get the Haman anti-Semites. That's what happens when you get a bit of jet lag, you know. What are the Haman anti-Semites? Wherever they go, they see this gaping hole created by the Jews. You know, things like the largest open-air concentration camp in the world. Big, gaping holes created by Jews. And so the Rebbe explains in this Sikha that there are two modes of anti-Semite. There's the anti-Semite who sees the Jewish person as a thorn in their side, who sees the Jewish person as the cause of all of our tzoros, all of our problems. Blame the Jews. Blame the Jews. You know the old Jewish joke, right? Where the guy says to the famous anti-Semite, he says, all the problems in the world are because of the Jews and the penguins. The guy looks at him, he says, why the penguins? He says, why the Jews? Everything is because of the Jews. The Jews brought, I don't know if you follow these things. Hopefully you have better ways to use your time. The Jews are the ones who have brought all these gender issues to the world. The Jews are the ones who brought entertainment to the world. The Jews are the ones, right? The Jews. The Jews are the problem. A big mound in the middle of our field. We'd have a perfect world were it not for the Jews. Let's find a way to get rid of them. And then you get the other kind of anti-Semite who says the Jews are a gaping hole in our lives. Something that we feel is empty in our lives is because of the Jewish people. And in doing this, the Rebbe identifies for us old and new anti-Semitism, classic and modern anti-Semitism. Because classic anti-Semitism was always the Achashverosh type. Classic anti-Semitism was always, there's something about the Jew that just, we got to get rid of these people. And we learned to live with that. Over a few centuries of anti-Semitism, we learned how to live with it. We learned how to deal with it. We thought we eventually would find a way to overcome it. So let's look a little bit, and let's try and understand what this classical anti-Semitism looks like. And let's do this as a collaborative exercise. Who would be the icon in our history to represent classical anti-Semitism? Which personality? Who? Amalek. What do you say? Paroi. Paroi is so last season. I mean, Paroi is before the Jews were even Jews. You know, Paroi just... That's much more modern, right? I'm looking at an icon in Torah. So you'd say Amalek, yes? Amalek, can we get a vote? Yes, are we happy to say Amalek is like the Avi Avoy Satuma, the ultimate state of anti-Semite? Now the truth of the matter is that Amalek is really just a variant of Esav. Esav is the granddaddy of all anti-Semitism. In fact, we know this. How do we know this? Because the expression that we use to describe classical endemic anti-Semitism is halacha b'yodua. It is a well-known, established axiom of Jewish law that Esav soine leYaakov, not Amalek. Esav hates Yaakov. Amalek is a subsection of Esav. Maybe the most virulent, most extreme version of Esav. But Esav is the problem. Esav hates Yaakov. Esav also has a nickname, yes? What's his nickname? Edom. So we'll use the terms interchangeably. We'll talk about Esav and we'll talk about Edom, and they're interchangeable terms. The question is, why? Why does Esav hate Yaakov? No? Why? He stole the birthright. Yes? That's what we've been told. That is the story, and we're sticking to it. That Yaakov stole Esav's birthright. Question for you. Did that happen? No. He sold the birthright, right? Okay, so it's a classic blood libel. This is exactly how Edom operates. Let's invent a story. In the story, we'll talk about the fact that the Jews have usurped something of ours. They've stolen something of ours. And because of that, that will justify us attacking them. Now go plug that into all of history and you'll find the same thing happening again and again and again. The Jews are responsible for the downfall of Germany in the First World War. The Jews poisoned the wells. The Jews are the ones who are the representation of communism if you live in the West, or the representation of capitalism if you live in the East. So these are the people who are looking to undermine. They want to destroy our world that we're trying to build. They are the problem. They're taking what is ours. Yes? Is that fair? That's Edom. That is Edom's classic approach to life, is that Yaakov has taken something that belongs to me. And I want it back, and the only way to get it back is I've got to get rid of Yaakov. Have you ever thought about this? How come it is that if Esav really believed that Yaakov had stolen something from him, why did he not sit Yaakov down and say, I want it back? His immediate response is, Vayistoim Esav leYaakov. Okay, it's a little bit later, it's after the brachas. But basically, Rashi tells us, he's waiting for the opportunity to kill Yaakov. There's no negotiation, there's no opportunity for restoration, for reparations. There's just one way. You got to get rid of him. That's Edom. Edom says, you've taken what is mine, and now I'm coming after you. So what is his? What did we take that was his? Well, you say a birthright. I don't know. Does Esav strike you as the kind of person who cares about spiritual things like a birthright, to be able to serve in the Beis HaMikdash? Because like he says at the time when he's bargaining over the lentil soup, right? That's what it's all about. A bowl of soup for a birthright, Rashi tells us right then that Esav says, I don't really want this job because it comes with a very high risk of death. Because if you serve in the Beis HaMikdash in the wrong way, it's tickets. So does Esav strike you as the kind of person who has these deep, profound spiritual aspirations that were schlepped away from him by Yaakov, and therefore he wants to kill Yaakov? Is that how he strikes you? How does Esav strike you? What do you think Esav cares about? What's Esav into? He what? Self-gratification, gashmias, materialism. Esav is the icon of materialism. And you want to know how he knows? Hayodayim, Yedei Esav. He's a hands person. If you can touch it, if you can feel it, if you can hold it, if you can count it in your bank account, that's tachlis. He's a hands person. Hayodayim, Yedei Esav. That's what Esav wants. Esav becomes Edom. Have you seen what Edom did over the course of history? Oh yes, of course. They built great temples of meditation. Esav, Edom, they are the people who started the concept of mindfulness back in the 2nd century. Right, the gladiators practiced mindfulness before attacking each other in the grand circus of Rome. What does Esav want? What does Edom want? Olam hazeh, what is here and now, the materialism, whether it was the colonialist version or it's now the capitalist version of Edom, it's the same principle. Let's amass as much fortune as we can in whichever way we can, even if that includes maybe crushing some people along the way. So what did Yaakov take from him? What did Yaakov take from Edom? What did we take? Did we build some big empire that challenged Edom? Did we? Yes. We control the banks. Okay, so that's a hard one for Edom. But in the original version of the story, what did we take? We took the brachas. What are the brachas? Spiritual things. Mitalla shomayim. Rashi says that's what Yaakov even tells Esav after. He says, listen, I didn't even get the stuff that you wanted. Right? The brachas that you wanted, I didn't even get. So perhaps one of the great secrets of the battle between Yaakov and Esav has to take us back to the eve before Yaakov and Esav reunite in person. So remember, they haven't seen each other for 20 years. The happiest 20 years of Esav's life, probably. Because Yaakov's nowhere around, he doesn't have this mound in the middle of his field, nobody's bothering him. Now they're going to reunite. Now the attitude Yaakov has to their reunion is really different from the attitude Esav has to their reunion. Yaakov is optimistic. Yaakov says, "Vayihili shor v'chamor." Let me tell you, I'm ready for Mashiach. That's how we interpret the verse. I'm ready for Mashiach. Esav, how about you? Esav is, I'm ready with my 400 mercenaries. They're not exactly on the same page. So on the eve of their reunion, the Torah tells us, Vayivoser Yaakov levadoi. Yaakov remains alone. Vayeovek ish imoi ad alois hashachar. And a man, mysterious anonymous man, struggles with him ad alois hashachar, until the morning. Who's the man? Esav's angel. The Sar shel Esav, right? Esav's angel. Every nation has their angel to represent them. Yaakov is fighting with Esav's angel. And the Torah uses this expression. It says, Vayeovek, which means that they wrestled. But the Medrash says that it means that Helu avak ragleim, they kicked up the dirt from under their feet, ad kisei hakavod, all the way to the supernal divine throne. What are they fighting about? So why did Yaakov remain alone? How did that happen? How did Yaakov remain by himself in the middle of the night? It's not prudent, it's not practical. Again, I come from Joburg, you don't do that. Why is he alone in the middle of the night? Says the Torah, he went back, the Gemara tells us, al pachim ketanim. He went back to get pachim ketanim. You know what pachim ketanim are? I don't know. Have you ever seen how Jewish people travel? Then you'll know what pachim not so ketanim are. You know, Jewish people, they tell us they tell us that you're allowed 23 kilos. To us, it's 23 kilos plus say a little bit, And then when they look at us and they say your bag is overweight, you say, what are you talking about? How could it be overweight? And that's just what we put in under the plane. But when we walk onto the plane, we have every conceivable kind of package. A backpack and a thing on wheels, and then a thing that comes around your waist, and then a packet, and then another packet. And God forbid they should tell us we have too many. What, I should starve on this flight? I'm going all the way to Sydney. Pachim ketanim. What's pachim ketanim? Little packages, little containers. And the Gemara says something really fascinating. From here we learn that for tzaddikim, because they earn every bit of what they own legally and honestly, they prioritize their possessions over their own bodies. Wait, what? Okay, listen. I don't know if the Gemara was around in the time of armed robberies, but I come from a place where we know a little bit about these things. If somebody, God forbid, walks up to a person and points a gun at them and says, give me your wallet, you give them the wallet. Because it's obvious that assets are not as valuable as life. What's the Gemara saying? Because from here we learn that tzaddikim value their assets more than their own lives. Well, I don't know if we should be learning from them, if that's the attitude. What does it mean? It means not that they value their property, their personal items, that they have this attachment to the materialism of this world. It's the pachim ketanim. It's those tiny little particles of spiritual potential that are embedded inside the physical reality of this world. That's what a tzaddik values. The tzaddik doesn't value the brand name on the particular wallet. It happened to me once. I could tell stories, but I was once held up. One of the times that I was held up. I was young at the time, and Dafka, the next day, it was a friend of myself. We were supposed to go with the mitzvah tank in South Africa around to a whole lot of country communities on America Shlichus. So what happened was I had my wallet in one pocket and I had his wallet in the other pocket, because his wallet had all the cash that we were supposed to use to buy whatever we needed for this trip. Now the guy's got a gun at me and he says, give me your wallet. And I'm thinking, I don't remember which wallet is in which pocket. So obviously I had the sense not to say to him, hang on, let me just check. So I put my hand into the pocket where I normally keep my wallet, pulled it out, shock, horror, it's his wallet, it's the other guy's wallet. So for a brief second I was like, whoa, hang on. But obviously I realized you don't do that. So tzaddik doesn't get too attached to that kind of thing. Oh, it's my wallet, I got it from my grandmother, can you take the money and give me the wallet back? Pachim ketanim means that Yaakov and the whole of Jewish thinking is, let's find the spiritual value and potential, the divine spark in every piece of this world. It might look tiny to everybody else. It's pachim ketanim. In anybody else's assessment of assets, this has no value. And to us, it is more valuable than anything else. It's when he's going to retrieve that holiness from the world, that's when Esav's angel steps in and says, whoa, not so fast. You think you're going to suck all of the value and energy out of the world and leave us just with a shell? Nothing can sustain as a shell. The great empires that we want to build, we cannot build if you're going to take the soul out of it. Don't touch my world. And that's why the battle between them is a battle that is described as vayei avek, avak. Avak is dust, tiny particles that seem of no value to anybody else, yet the Medrash identifies they go all the way to the heavenly throne. This is the battle of classic anti-Semitism. Classic anti-Semitism looks at us and says, you're in our way. We just want the world to be a place of hedonism. We just want the world to be a place of self-growth. We want the world to be a place where we have no responsibility, no moral compass. We could do as we please, feed our enemies to the lions as we build our great towers of industry. Don't stand in our way with your insistence that there should be value in the world, that there should be higher purpose, that there should be morality. To quote a certain book that starts with the word mine, and I won't finish it. The Jews inflicted conscience on the world. And we don't want that. We don't want you in our faces. And so, by the way, if you have a look throughout the whole of Jewish history, you'll consistently find that classic anti-Semitism first begins by outlawing Jewish practice and then attacks Jewish people. So you first have the laws against studying Torah, or you have the burning of holy books, or you have the prohibition against the bris or against the observance of Shabbos. The things, the tools that we use in order to take this world and to turn it into a higher place, into a more developed, holy place, they try and interfere with that. And when that fails, that's when they then attack us personally. Because they're looking to flatten, to level the playing field. Not to have us standing there as this great conscience, as this great representation of a higher purpose. They don't want us to transform our world into a better, holier place. And so the Zohar tells us that the battle between Yaakov and that angel continues, as the Torah describes, until dawn. The Zohar says that's till the dawn of the time where Esav will lose their authority over the world. The dawn of a time of, dare we call it, the decline of the West. The dawn of a time where that great warrior, that powerful personality who has always dictated to the world for centuries how things should go, will go into decline. And that's when Yaakov starts to win the battle. But that's not where everything ends. The Arizal tells us that since the time of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, there are two nations that the Jewish people have to contend with. One is Edom, and the other is Yishmael. Now it's important to note, we cannot bind any nation on earth genealogically to either Edom or Yishmael. There's nobody who has that chain any longer, right? Because we know that Sancherib came along, and Sancherib completely uprooted all of the classical ancient nations, moved them around, mixed them up, and as a result, there is nobody who could claim that they are direct descendants of any original ancient nation, with one exception, obviously, which is us. But we can say that there is an ideological link. There are people who live with the ideology of Edom and people who live with the ideology of Yishmael. I believe that the Rebbe said on more than one occasion that the Arab world today is not descended from Yishmael. But ideologically, there's an emergence of a Yishmael anti-Semitism, a new brand of anti-Semitism that we haven't seen before. A Haman kind of anti-Semitism. And Haman is also not Yishmael, by the way. Haman is who? Persia. Haman himself may track back to Esav, but Haman is operating in Persia, which is really interesting. The story of Purim is Galus Poros, not Galus Edom. Yes, the actor Haman himself has genealogical links to Esav, but we're talking about a story that happens in Poros in Persia. We'll come back to that in just a second because it's fascinating. So what's Yishmael about? That's what we have to understand. This is the emerging anti-Semitism. And emerging means that it's been around for some time. You know, the one thing that has to strike you about what's going on in the current conflict is if you had to choose an icon to represent the current military conflict in Gaza, that icon would probably be a tunnel. And let me tell you, it's pretty impressive what they've built. And it's all underground. You've got these two societies, the above ground and the beneath ground society. The great fear of the Israeli army going into this environment was the threat of the people who could pop out of the ground at any time, chas v'shalom, and attack us. We've been there, we've seen it. And so one of the things that they have to try to do strategically is they have to try and force terrorists from their subterranean rat traps to the surface. Because only when you force them to the surface, then you can confront them. And then you can remove them. Isn't it fascinating that at the same time as we have terrorists popping up from under the ground, at the same time that we're discovering that underneath hospitals and underneath schools are command centers and missile production factories, and we're now bringing it all to the surface, showing the world this is what's happening, unearthing, uncovering, excavating, exposing. We all expected, what did we expect? We expected the whole world to say, wow, that's actually true, what you've been saying. We expected all thinking people on planet Earth to accept clear evidence. We expected that if we allowed their journalists to come with us, as we did recently, into that massive tunnel that they found, and we showed them the evidence in front of their faces, we anticipated that everybody would use seichel, and they would say, you know, the Jews are just. What happened instead? They came out of their own tunnels. All those people who used to say some of my best friends are Jewish are now showing their true colors. All the people who used to be able to speak privately in their little echo chambers of their WhatsApp groups, and I'll tell you a funny thing that happened to me. So I gave a shiur, I don't even remember when it was, but I can tell you one thing, I look a lot younger in that video than now. And apparently in that shiur I said something about the fact that Jews really do want to control the world. And the point I wanted to make was that we want to bring the world to a state of holiness. So of course, somebody got hold of that clip, and it's been doing the rounds now in the white supremacist world. And I get every few months, I get a concerned citizen who says, do you know what they're saying about you? And they send me this clip. They've taken out this little piece that Jews want to control the world. So I'm famous now. I'm famous as one of the rabbis who's listened to by the white supremacist echo chambers. So I think this is the best thing that happened to me, because at least now I know. The other rabbis don't know how much they hate them. At least like this, I know. I came out of the tunnel. One of the things that happened in the last few weeks is that people have been forced from their underground spaces of speaking whatever rhetoric it is against Judaism. They've been forced to the surface. That's why there's no fence anymore to sit on, because now you have to stake your claim. You have to state what you believe. You have to pick a side. There was a really funny moment a few weeks ago in Johannesburg where a frum guy was invited to speak at a very large black evangelical church. Okay, you want to ask his rabbi how he did that? Ask his rabbi. I don't know. But he got up in front of them, and this guy's good. He could really get into the evangelical world. He was really good. And he got up there and he said, thundering from the pulpit, he said, God is picking the teams. And there is a team that is with God, and there's a team that is against God. It was quite something to say. But this is what you're seeing. You're seeing this development of two streams. You've got to come out of your tunnel. People pop out of the tunnel, tear down a poster, the next week they don't have a job. It's exactly the same as people coming out of the tunnel and being taken out by the Israeli Defense Forces. When you expose people, then you can deal with them. The new anti-Semitism that we're seeing is this incredible place of people willing to take huge risk to say something that they are absolutely convinced is a moral position. We had a really interesting conversation amongst the rabbis in South Africa about our president. And somebody who is in the know and fairly close to the high government circles shared with us at this gathering, at this presentation, that the reason the South African ruling party has taken such a strong pro-Hamas stance is because they actually believe the story that this is an oppressed people and that Israel is the oppressors. In other words, you have this new anti-Semitism of people emerging with a belief that there really is a hole in the field there really is something missing in terms of who I am as a human being, in terms of my own sense of beliefs, of values. And the only way I can fill that hole is to blame somebody else, that they are the bad guys, that they are the oppressors, that they are the people who are the representation of everything that we progressives are against. I'm not suggesting for 1 second that people operating under the banner of Hamas claim to be progressives. But the fact that they've become the darling of the progressive world is because of this choretz principle, this principle of a society that claims to have morals and values, but actually feels completely empty on the inside and is desperately trying to fill that with a sense of conscience, with a sense of ethics and morals. A different kind of anti-Semitism that the Rebbe spoke about in 1965. An anti-Semitism that comes from a sense of my own lack. Not the fear of what you may destroy in my life, but the fact that I don't have a solid base to stand on, and I've got to invent something. I've got to invent a cause. I've got to invent a sense of supremacy, moral supremacy. Or alternatively, invent a sense of victimhood. You know, if you go back to Yishmael's story, remembering that this is an ideology, Yishmael's story is never a story of wanting to have all that great material blessing. We don't find that the conflict between Yishmael and his brother Yitzchak is anything like the conflict between Esav and his brother Yaakov. They're not battling over, our father gave you the brachos that I wanted, or you had the position that I wish that I would have had. That's not what they're fighting over. They're fighting over position in the family. They're fighting over identity. So Sarah Imeinu comes home one day to Avraham and she says, that son of yours, you always know when a kid is in trouble, when the spouse says to the other one, your son. Just so happens here was actually only his son. That son of yours is trouble. He's got to go. And Avraham Avinu doesn't want that, obviously, because Avraham Avinu is a very inclusive personality. He's absolute chesed. He works with people. He doesn't excise people. And he says, there's got to be a way. And eventually the Eibishter has to tell, Hashem has to tell him, listen to your wife. I know every wife on the planet quotes this pasuk often. What was Yishmael doing that was so objectionable? So there are various opinions, right? One opinion is target practice on his little half-brother Yitzchak. Shooting arrows, shooting arrows and then saying, how can you blame me? How can you accuse me? I had no ill intentions. Or in the modern version, I love it. They don't say it so much anymore, but they used to speak a lot about homemade rockets. Do you remember that in the early days? They used to speak about homemade rockets. Like I've never understood what a homemade rocket is. Is it like a school project? You get all the kids together and say, well, what are we going to do today? We're going to make a missile. Like, did your kids ever come home from school with that? And the argument is always, well, what do you expect them to do? Because they don't have, you always hear this, they don't have an army. They don't have an Iron Dome. I think there was an American politician who said something like that, right? They don't have an Iron Dome. We're the victims. We shot arrows, but we're the victims. We did target practice with Yitzchak, but how dare you kick me out of the house? It's a form of anti-Semitism that creates a filling of a void. I know that I'm fundamentally nothing. I know that I fundamentally have no claim. I know that I'm fundamentally a fictional group of people. And so I have to fill the space by inventing some kind of an identity, as Yishmael does. Because when Hashem himself, and it's the only time in history you have this kind of clarity as to a person's lineage, when Hashem himself says to Avraham, Ki beYitzchak yikarei lecha zara, only Yitzchak will be considered your lineage, will be considered your heir, will be considered your progeny. Yishmael says, actually, I'm the heir. That's what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says. That Yishmael was fighting with Yitzchak about Yerusha, who is the heir. As much as Esav and Yaakov had their differences, Esav never claimed that Yaakov is not one of the heirs. He just wanted double because he's Esav. Esav wants a lot of assets. So he wants to be the firstborn because you get more. You get more out of the pot. But he never turned to Yaakov and said, you are an illegitimate heir to our father. Yishmael does. Yishmael says, I am the heir. I am the Yoresh. This is a core identity. You know, you inherit something not because you pay for it, not because you work for it, not because you earn it. You inherit something because of who you are, not what you have done. Yaakov and Esav fight over what they do. Esav says, what we do, we make the world into a place of our success. Yaakov says, what do? We make the world into a place of God's success. They were fighting over method. They were fighting over behavior. Yishmael says, we're fighting over who we are. I have a void inside, I need to fill it. And the only way I can fill it is to appropriate an identity that doesn't belong to me. We're the real Jews. Or recently, as somebody said, Moses was a Muslim. Yes. Go figure. To appropriate an identity because you don't have an identity. That's the new anti-Semitism that we're dealing with. That's the Haman. You know, Rabbi Yeshua tells us in the Gemara Sanhedrin that what happens if the Jewish people don't do tshuva before Mashiach comes? Because we have to do tshuva. That's what's going to happen. We have to do tshuva before Mashiach comes. So what happens if the Jews don't do tshuva before Mashiach comes? Which is a classic Jewish way of thinking, right? That's Jewish. You all have to do something. So what happens if you don't? So Rabbi Yeshua says, if, God forbid, we do not do tshuva before Mashiach has to come, then then Hashem is going to send a leader, a king, as he calls it, who will have decrees that are as harsh as the decrees of Haman, and then everybody will do teshuvah. What does that mean, a king whose decrees are as harsh as Haman? The Gemara says, Tachas Edom v'loi tachas Yishmael. You'd much rather live under Edom, under Esav, the devil you know, the devil who calls himself a devil, who has no problem saying, I have an issue with Jews, who has no problem posting a video of me and saying this is why we have to get rid of the Jews, because they want to control the world. Has no problem, doesn't pretend that actually I love Jews, it's just Zionists that have a problem. Tells you straight, I don't like Jews. Tachas Edom v'loi tachas Yishmael. It is better to live under Edom, the devil you know, than under Yishmael, the newfangled kind of anti-Semitism that pretends to be so good, so progressive, so liberal, so embracing, so Jewish. And that's why we even have a few Jewish people who've fallen into this trap. And are quite happy to post on their social media about how they marched with the pro-Hamas marchers and they felt so safe. I mean, we have a number for somebody you should be speaking to, you know. Or as the Arizal says that after we finish the Golus of Edom, we will have to tackle a different Golus of Yishmael. And the Zohar says that Golus Yishmael is Kosha Mikulam, is the Golus that is more difficult than any other experience we've ever had before. Why? Because when someone is trying to fill a void, and the void they're trying to fill is to give themselves a sense of validity, it's much more difficult to say you're invalid. When somebody attacks you, it's easy to get up and attack them back. But when somebody creates the sensation that they are actually the ones in need, it's very difficult to stand up against that. I'll tell you a really interesting thing that I came across. There's a guy in our community who went on an auction site a few weeks ago, and he found a whole lot of old Jewish books, so he decided to buy them and then afterwards find out what they are. So he sends me a message. He was so excited. He says, I just bought a whole bunch of these books, and could you take a look and tell me if there's anything valuable? So he brought them over to the shul, and I had a look, and I said, well, you've done really well. You bought yourself a set of 3 chumashim and 2 mishnayos, and then a book I'd never seen before. So I said, if you don't mind, I'd like to take a look at this book. Never seen it before. This book is written by somebody called Rabbi Eliyahu Gordon, who lived at the turn of the previous century in Vilna. And he wrote this book called Dimas Ashukim, which is effectively bewailing the state of the Jewish community at that time and the fact that people were they were taking certain political moves. I don't know the exact historical context of what was going on, but one of the things he says up there, which is really interesting, he says, why does the Gemara say that there'll be a king like Haman before Mashiach comes? What's unique about Haman? You know what he says? He says, what's unique about Haman's Gezerah is it wasn't an official government decree. It wasn't the king speaking. Because historically, whenever we've had high-level governmental decrees on any level against the Jewish people, we've also had people who could approach the government and sometimes mitigate the effects of the decree. What Haman did was he empowered the man on the street, that wherever Jews might be, anywhere in the 127 provinces of Achashverosh's kingdom, they would rise up and attack people in a decentralized fashion on the streets. And he writes that that's what the Gemara means when it says before Mashiach, if we don't do tshuva, we'll have a king like Haman, a decentralized anti-Semitism. An anti-Semitism that isn't the result of a particular government choosing to make decrees against the Jewish people, but a grassroots movement that happens all over the place in unpredictable fashion on the streets of a city in which you live, where people come forward and say, we are the victims, we are the ones marching against supremacy, against colonialism, against whatever objectionable term it might happen to be. We are the ones who represent morals and values. And how do you stop that? How do you stop a decentralized form of anti-Semitism? The Rebbe concluded that Sikha in 1965 by saying that after the miracle of Purim, Esther went to the Sanhedrin and she said, Kisvuni ledoros, please record my story in the canon of Judaism. And they didn't want to. The Sanhedrin didn't want to. And the reason they gave why they didn't want to record the story of Purim is because they said, we don't want the non-Jewish world to have a record for the future of this story of anti-Semitism and how there was the combating of anti-Semitism, because it may in the future encourage more anti-Semitism. Said Esther to them, but it's already recorded, as the Megillah tells us, in the history books of Poras Umodai. Anti-Semitism, the Rebbe explains from this, is already written into their books. There's nothing that we can do that's going to generate more anti-Semitism as long as what we do is aligned with the Torah. And therefore, Kisfuni Ledoros, says Esther, make sure that my story is recorded so that Jews throughout history will never hesitate to respond to anti-Semitism for fear that it will fuel anti-Semitism, because it is already written into their books. It is already within their communities. It is on the streets. And therefore we have to know that we need a method that is an eternal method of combating anti-Semitism. And that is what? Daven. Before Esther went to the king, Leich kenoises Kallah Yehudim. Get the Yidden together and daven, because you have to connect with Hashem, because like the Gemara in Sota tells us about what's going to happen before Mashiach comes, it repeats again and again and again. Al mi yesh lonu li'ishoin. Who could we rely upon? Not Mr. Biden, and not the United Nations, for sure not, and not all the great friends of the Jewish people. Elo alavinu shebashomayim. We can only trust our Father in heaven. We can only appeal to our Father in heaven. We can only connect to our Father in heaven. We can only expect our Father in heaven, because only He could remove a decentralized, grassroots, liberally minded, self-defending kind of anti-Semitism as we have in today's world. And the key to connect with Hashem, is to come out of our own tunnels, which we'll speak about tomorrow, please God.